So, the Airbnbs in the world pioneered the ability to spend $1 and be very, very clear about how much money you're spending and the acquisition cost of that customer. You can put $1 in and get $1.20 out. But we've overdone it, and technology has transformed at the same time that privacy has transformed the landscape. So now we're moving back to a probabilistic world, which means marketing is moving back to the ways things were done in the 1960s to the 1990s, where you're not going to have as much control and understanding about who and how to reach people. And so I think in a lot of ways that incentivizes you to be different and diverse and creative and to try new channels, especially to go against the grain about what has been working over the last 10 years.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Darrin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Podcast now.
That's fine. I thought you were recording this whole thing.
No. Now we're recording. Stevie, you can keep this in, okay? Starting from here. Okay.
All right. I thought you were recording before.
I'm going to give you an absolutely boring intro about you, and then you have to pretend that it is amazing.
Cool.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you a question on what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you? How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, we're going to start right now. He is the co-founder at Clarify and the current head of marketing technology at Ramp, where he leads innovative MarTech initiatives. Previously, he was at the helm of growth and GTM operations at Runway, an A16Z fintech company revolutionizing business planning. With expertise ranging from building CRMs to spearheading operations and growth, he continues to shape the future of businesses that leverage technology for marketing and operations. But most of all, he's one of the good marketers, not one of the bad marketers. Welcome to the Product Tea, Austin Hayes. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Leah. That was such a great introduction. I don't know if one has ever been done so great before.
Okay, the marketer just came out of you.
I will clarify, though, I am not currently at Ramp anymore. I left back in November to start my company, Clarify. We're building a next generation CRM. So if I do any marketing today, it's just to tell people about what we're building. And obviously, I've been in the MarTech space and the RevTech space for a long time. So it's something that I'm pretty passionate about, being able to build a tool that I feel like I wished I could have had at all my previous roles.
So I refuse to say that my introduction was wrong because your LinkedIn still lists you as actually active in there. So unfortunately, you're still employed there. So because I am right and your LinkedIn is wrong. Or wait, no, your LinkedIn is correct and I am correct and you're wrong. I think that's how it went. Anyways, Austin, what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
So I can be a very direct person. And I think that often comes across to a lot of folks. Well, let me clarify. I think there are two types of people. There are people who love other direct people, and there are folks who get offended or take things personally by interacting and engaging with direct people. And I think when folks get to know me better, they come to fall into that former category, the people who actually love direct communication and direct style of feedback. It can just be hard, though, if you've never worked with somebody who tends to cut to the chase and not spew the bullshit of whatever you're working on. It's hard not to take things personally. And so I've learned over the years to maybe dial it in a little bit before being so direct with folks. But for the friends that I have and the folks who know me and have worked with me, they could probably say with confidence that that's my style and that's my personality. And the benefit of that is it helps you just work together and move through issues really quickly. The detriment is that if you've never done it before, or if you're not used to that style, it can seem very abrasive.
Let me ask you a question. Did it ever happen to you that a friend was of the opinion that you are having a bad opinion about them, and then they were not in contact with you, and then after a couple of months you just asked them like, hey, yo, what's up? Like, how are you doing? And they're like, hey, I thought you hate me. Because this happened to me quite often. Like, I think about 2 to 3 times in the past couple of months, just people thinking that I do not like them anymore. But the last interaction that we had was just me saying that I don't like something. But that was it. That's me being direct, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a meta point here. There's two things. One is, first, I don't think that people should have to get along with everybody. And maybe that's a controversial opinion, but you think about it, there's, 7 billion people on this planet. If you really think that you can move through life and get along with everybody, I think you have some internal conflict to work through. The second thing is a lot of times people who pretend not to have conflict with others actually do. They just like hide it and don't talk about it. And I think that's actually an even unhealthier way of living because you're not being clear with the market and yourself about where you stand. One opinion that I like to share with people is like, try not to make your mind up about people for as long as you can. There's a really great book by a mentor I had back in college named Steven Sample. He was the president of USC, which is where I went to college. He then was president emeritus, I think. But he wrote this book called The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. And he has this chapter called Thinking Gray. And the idea of thinking gray is just to effectively not choose a side, not choose an opinion about whether something is black or white, whether somebody did something or acted a particular way or is a certain way until you really feel like you have to, either because an event is compelling you to, or a decision is compelling you to, or because something about, the situation and your moral compass aligns you to that. And it's really hard to do in practice. And I feel like there's lots of days where I think gray, and then there's days where I've changed my mind and I think black or white again, particularly about people and actions. But it's a really good, model of how to behave for folks. And so I try to emulate it.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyways, like the main thread is like, yeah, I think there's some days where I wonder if people are upset with me. But then I remember like, well, I'm not usually upset about most people. I can count on one hand the people that I'm really upset with in life, maybe because of something they've done to me. But even then, it's like, are you really holding on to that? Are you really moving through your life holding on to what other people have done? Or have you just accepted it and moved forward and forgiven and, not let it sweat?
Yeah, I'm always joking about this also in therapy. Like, I think my therapist said it in a way that, in the first kind of 20 years of my adult life, and so I'm not someone that sees black and white. I always just see black. Like, this is kind of like my thing. In the first 20 years, I did not like anyone, like including myself. And now as I'm older, I'm starting to really start to accept myself. And now I need to learn to also accept others. I think Jason Fried said it in a really, really good way. And he said, instead of like thinking about something gray, which I think I can relate to what you're saying. Like, I think it's a very good thing. But I think the way that he said it is that always give people the benefit of the doubt, even if it's really, really, really hard. In most cases, you actually come out advantageous on top, because if someone is malicious towards you, you do not want to give them more ammo to do something, of course. And if you falsely accuse someone of being negative about something and they weren't, then you're kind of also trampling over the entire kind of porcelain shop. But yeah, we're not here in therapy sessions, unfortunately. You could still say something to it, of course. But
I do. One last thought. I mean, this is really important for people to realize is like, there are going to be wildly successful people who are both brilliant and wonderful and humble and amazing, and who are also total pieces of trash. And like, I think like all it takes is meeting one very successful person who's a total piece of shit for you to realize that like the world is kind of divorced from how people are. And so like, it's up to you to decide how much it's going to bend you out of shape or not,
Yeah. No, that is true. That is true. I'm not going to say anything to this other than like narcissism specifically is like really, really visible in these people. But maybe you need to be a narcissist to be a successful tech founder in some industries. I don't know what it is, but we're living at that. This is not the therapy tea. This is the product tea. So, but we're going to talk about something anyways that is a little bit in this kind of vein. And you said something about, or I said something about like cutting the bullshit, or I think I called you the good marketer at the start. So what did we talk about? We were talking about also like in the pre-talk a little bit about there's, at least to me, there's some kind of a difference between good marketing and bad marketing. And I don't mean in terms of performance, like what performs and what does not perform. I am of the opinion that if you understand the incentives of a system, then you also understand where the system is moving towards to. So for instance, if I give a marketer a specific goal that incentivizes traffic, then they're going to bring me traffic. That does not mean that they bring me good traffic, but they're going to bring me some traffic. And these are things that we also see like on LinkedIn all the time, like all this content, everything looks like Mr. Beast has created it lately. Like everyone has a face that looks like really like shocked into the camera. Everything is oversaturated. Everyone on LinkedIn has the most amazing insight. Every company does this. No company does this and that. And it feels a bit cringe to me. And I'm not saying that I'm not doing it as well in some regards, but is it becoming a little bit kind of streamlined, how extreme we have to be? Or is this just like a side of the times right now? I don't know. Like, I know you have some opinion on this, but like things have changed, right?
Yeah. I mean, back up to 2014, 2015, when I started doing B2B marketing and sales, I couldn't find a person on LinkedIn who had more than 10 or 15,000 followers. And now it's like, yeah, if you don't have 15, 20, 50,000 followers, who the fuck are you? Like, get out of here. And then you ask the question is like, what does that do? What does that matter? It's a signal to the market of your kind of competence or importance or whatever. And I think like the channel has become saturated, much like other marketing channels. It's been around for a long time. tools have developed to allow you to gamify it. And so as a consequence, there's a lot of people who have figured out how to manipulate it. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's good. I mean, it does drive further competition. But the hard part, and I think for folks like you and I who enjoy conversations and getting deep into insights, is that there's a level of superficiality to it. Like, for example, we talked about this earlier with Eric. It's like, do you really have to be on LinkedIn to build a generational company? And I'd argue like, no, you don't at all. But there's this expectation that you do. And so if you're not doing these things, if you're not posting every day about you building the thing or hustling or trying to get ahead or how cool your company is or whatever, there's this feeling that you're missing out or perhaps that you're leaving leads on the table. And to be clear, I think there's some level of truth to that. Like LinkedIn is a really great way for people to discover your product. And so there is some truth to it. But, it's the same reason why, some folks like aren't on Twitter or aren't on Instagram, because social media has become so saturated that it's not actually meaningful anymore. So then the question becomes like, where do you actually get the insights and conversations that were originally in that channel or medium? And yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I'm finding like newsletters in particular, like from Lenny and Kyle and yourself and Elena and others are more interesting places to interact and learn.
So I agree. But I think if we take a step back and look at the first principles on like what this entire exercise is about, like LinkedIn and all these other things, this is about a go-to-market motion where you try to capture demand in the market, or you also you're not technically generating demand, but like maybe, I don't know, but like you're mostly trying to capture demand. So what is this about? In a time where it is so easy to create products, as some kind of product. And I would argue that I'm not saying that your startup is easy in any way, right? Like, so what you're doing, like with Clarified, it doesn't mean that creating a CRM is not easy, but it is definitely easier than it used to be like 10 to 20 years ago from start to finish.
Yeah.
What that means is we start to have more competition on the product side, while the size of the market on the money that is available for CRM solutions in general has not changed largely. It's just divided through more competition and so forth. And as you said, competition is also good because it drives up quality and so forth. But what this does is it also drives up this kind of cutthroat marketing. I don't know what this is what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it cutthroat marketing, not bad marketing, where we start to spend time on things that are just like really, really cringe, not just cringe, but they're not real. And what I mean with this is that we're just like shifting market shares around without deriving value to the customer. So let me just give you an example. What you mentioned right now with the Substacks and the newsletters, yes, I would agree. I mean, of course, nobody would say that they're fake, but I think that I'm also trying to be extremely honest with what I do. I try to generate new content and new insights and so forth. But I do not know whether it's still possible the way that I did it, that Elena did it, that Adam Robinson did it, that others did it, also on LinkedIn, to just start up from the ground again with the same kind of effort. And the reason for this is because you're just so drowned out with all these automated noise that, yes, okay, you can go to the good newsletters, but at some point, Elena and me will not be around anymore and all these other people. So I do not know how the internet will look like, but there's this theory of the internet that is dying, right? Where there's too much garbage around, it starts to feed on itself and everything kind of becomes monotone. It's not that the good insights go away. I don't think that people become stupid or anything. It's just becoming really, really hard to find something. Contrary to the 90s, for instance, where I don't know what your experience was, but in my experience, in the 90s or 2000s, whatever, there were always these websites that looked like absolute garbage, but absolute treasure troves for something very, very specific. Mm-hmm. You find now everything on the net, but it is incredibly mediocre. And therefore, it's not getting pushed anymore in the search results, right? So finding niche stuff and niche learnings and upcoming people is very, very hard. I have some people that I think are going to be upcoming and really, really good. I can also name some of them afterwards. But this is how I'm seeing this right now. I don't know whether it's that easy anymore.
I mean, I think you bring up some really interesting thoughts around just the increasing competition that's derived from more of everything, more competition, more content, more people being out there. And actually, we had meant to talk about this later, but maybe it's a good segue. It reminds me a lot of email outbounding. Again, if you scroll back to 2015, I remember I was sitting in a 2-room sweatshop, which was my first startup. It was called Branch. It was out in Palo Alto, just off of University Avenue. And me and one of the co-founders and one of my peers used a little tool called Outreach to send 40,000 automated emails every day, or maybe it was every month. I can't remember, but it was a lot of shitty email. But we said, look, if we can send 100,000 emails and get 1,000 people to respond to us, that's more than going to fulfill our inbound number for the month. And we had a very simple sequence. We tried to be smart. We get their first name with little curly brackets, and we try to, figure out where they lived and put that in there. But today, now you can be much more advanced. Not only can you send 40,000 emails a day, you can send them from different IP addresses. You can send them from different domains so that Google can't actually detect your spam. You can use AI to research them and put something interesting, like a piece of content about them, perhaps a local sports team, something they care about, into the emails. But at the end of the day, like, I can show you my inbox and show you that I get close to 100 outbound emails every day, and they all are going to spam. And so, the analogy here is, like, even if there's somebody doing a really great job at this, even if using the latest technology, is the channel fundamentally overwhelmed by noise? Have we basically optimized so much that now it's a useless channel? Because that's the way that a lot of things happen in marketing. Not to say that Instagram is useless, Facebook is useless, but like, it's diminishing returns after some point for a company after you get to a certain size and stage. And the only way that you can really dominate the channel after that is to have enough cash to overwhelm all of your competition. And so for small folks, it's like, yeah, does the channel really make sense? Or should you actually be in pursuit of new channels or perhaps contrarian ways of being discovered? And that's where, like, I think, like, with all this stuff with AI coming out, there still is going to be fortune to the people who can figure out how to be different. And that requires human intellect, not a computer.
That is true. So I really love this topic. And I want to urge people who are from product not to switch off now just because we're talking about marketing, because I think this is exactly what they need to kind of understand. And I'm going to get to a point on why I think this is actually also a product problem. So what we're talking about when we talk about outbound or inbound, because sometimes, like, these kind of lines, they actually do blur. It's just, you're not just like talking that directly to someone. So when I'm looking at my spam folder, it looks similar to yours, but I get a lot of things that are kind of in between. So I get right now outbound messages from people who want to place podcast guests on the product tea and so forth, right? And they all sound the same. How do they sound the same? It's always, hi, Leah, I've listened to your last blah, 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 blah episodes on the product tea, and I especially loved the insight of blah, 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 blah about this and this. And now I have someone that I would like to place to your podcast as a guest. These people have never listened to one of my podcasts, but I'm not sure. Maybe one of those is actually genuine, but I've never received this many people who pretend that they have listened to my podcast in such great detail before they actually started to do outbound. Mm-hmm. And this is now to your point. If the technology becomes so good, what's going to happen is that I'm starting to develop a blindness. I always bring this experiment, or like this example from the 90s when we had banners that had a click-through rate of 2%. Right? Early on, like, oh, look, a banner. Oh, I need to click on it, 2%. And then it decreased to 0.2%. Then it decreased to 0.02%. People will learn that this shit does not work. And then they start to become a little bit immune to it. At least, like, if tech is starting to sell to tech and so forth, like, there's also a very grim point to be made about people who are not that familiar with technology, because the scam potential is starting to go up as well, dramatically, and really, really bad, also like with generative AI and so forth. But the more that people pretend to be actual humans, the more I actually wish that an outbound email would be clarified as, hey, I am an outbound email. Here's what I try to sell you. I'm not going to pretend that I love your stuff or anything. Mm-hmm. I just have a genuinely good solution. And I think I wanted to talk to you about this, because this to me is bad marketing. This is exactly bad marketing because it does not really help. It may be creating some kind of deals and so forth, but you're not really creating value. What you're doing is you're trying to use all these tips, right? Like, it's like, oh, you need to put the face of the CEO. You need to include something that is dear to them. You need to post when they are active due to their time zone on a Tuesday morning right after they had their coffee and all this stuff. You can automate all of this. And this feels weird to me. And I think it becomes ineffective with time, and therefore the human actually will go away in the classical sense in outbound, at least when we talk about these industries. I think so.
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue in some respects the human already has been removed. I mean, and look, and for all the smack talking I'm doing about outbound, there are still some great technology providers out there that I think are giving clear advantages to the people who use them. As one example, like, there's these AI-driven outbounding tools. Not all of them are the same. And without, endorsing certain vendors, there's one of them that does a really good job. And the reason it does a good job is because exactly this point is it's actually able to include personalized information about a user and actually grasp the person's attention in a way that's meaningful. Now, that's being driven largely by LLMs right now, but at the end of the day, this is tied to a single user. So a single SDR is sending what normally would have come from 12 to 15 people. So this question of like, has AI or have computers replaced humans? I would argue when you're sending what normally would have been 12 humans from one human, you've largely replaced the human at that point. The person you're interacting with is not actually who you know. It's just it's a persona that's being generated by the system, right? It's like you could give it a name, you give it a face. Maybe it's, Alex at this company. Maybe he really is the SDR you'll talk to, but he's sending more emails and it's not personalized in a way that's actually a human connection, which I'm fine with, because I think ultimately what this really comes down to, and maybe one of the central themes for both the LinkedIn stuff and outbounding, is that, fortune and fate is going to favor people who are original and authentic and are able to stand out in meaningful ways. And that's becoming harder to do. And so, if there's any lesson in a lot of this, it's that, we've just gone through, I think, a period of, especially in marketing, of like deterministic, rote machinization of marketing. Like, hey, set up the system, build the system, do system in a way that makes your company scale. And I think like we've found some natural limits to that. I personally experienced them at Ramp. Like we built some incredible outbounding technology and some marketing. And, by the time I was leaving, we were going back to billboards, right? And what are billboards great at? Billboards are great at spraying it, just like get as many people's eyeballs on your brand as possible, because we've lost the ability to be deterministic in our marketing. And this has a long history. If you go back to the 1980s, it wasn't deterministic. Then technology and marketing databases developed over the last 20 years. Now we can match people deterministically to the ads that they have. So, the Airbnbs in the world pioneered the ability to spend $1 and be very, very clear about how much money you're spending and the acquisition cost of that customer. You can put $1 in and get $1.20 out. But we've overdone it, and technology has transformed at the same time that privacy has transformed the landscape. So now we're moving back to a probabilistic world, which means marketing is moving back to the ways things were done in the 1960s to the 1990s, where you're not going to have as much control and understanding about who and how to reach people. And so I think in a lot of ways that incentivizes you to be different and diverse and creative and to try new channels, especially to go against the grain about what has been working over the last 10 years.
So I agree. And I think there's a broader point to be made as well, that if you have specific demand, so like I also would say that salespeople by and large do not create demand. I don't think I think I had a discussion with someone, I cannot remember who it exactly was. Like there was this question like, hey, do you actually create demand as a salesperson? And the salespeople that I grew up with, so to speak, at least in the professional world, always told me that, hey, look, a salesperson's job is not to convince. A salesperson's job is to find value for the customer. And if there is none, you abandon, right? Like you're not just trying to kind of make the sale and so forth. So a good CRO as well, like in a PLG time, also works in the same way. How do you know they work in the same way? They have compensation plans that reflect this, clawback clauses. We're only after long-term revenue and so forth. So we are detaching this. And this is, by the way, how I look at C-levels versus anyone else in the company. You are detaching the revenue, so the capture metrics that are around money, from the value creation that the entire company does, like marketing, how to communicate value, product, how to create value, and growth, how to connect the two and so forth. But you are disconnecting this capture of value and the C-level to what's happening in the organization. I think these are really the best companies. And now here's this kind of weird arc to why this matters to product people. We have been incredibly good in the last 10 to 20 years to professionalize the shipping of features. Not good features, not shit that matters, but we got extremely fast in kind of shipping all the time. We got so good in actually shipping stuff that we started to professionalize the creation of tech debt. Everything gets more complicated. We start to have discussions like how many story points that you could ship every week and so forth. Like the really, really dumb conversations in life. And what I always tell to my product managers is that when you're coming around a corner and you're giving me some kind of estimation on like what you are doing in the next quarters, how much money that brings for the company, how can you answer what this is if you did not think about how it is being sold afterwards in the market? even for a company that is post-product market fit, like that has customers and so forth. So the reason why I'm saying this is that I would wager that 90%, just saying now a bullshit number, you know what? Let's make this more dramatic. 99.9% of all companies on LinkedIn are probably not focusing enough on fixing their core product and really kind of dialing that in on what it actually is that makes them great. And they're still shipping too much crap on the top because it's just flashy to do. And the reason why this matters for marketing is if you think about what you put on a billboard in real life, just the way that you described it, and I love this point that you actually made. What do you put on there? Do you put the feature releases of like the add-ons that you have produced and so forth? No, you're putting the core brand message, like here's the stuff that we are fucking good at. And this is the differentiator from us to others. Like these typical Coca-Cola versus Pepsi campaigns, and now, I don't know, Delta versus United or whatever it is. But I think this is really what it is. We got so good at producing stuff that we forgot to actually develop the core product. And this is what product managers need to really understand. If you do not talk to marketing, if you do not know how to create a story out of it afterwards, then you're probably creating crap. Retention is important, right? But core product development is never going to go out of fashion. It just isn't. A CRM still has to be the best CRM. Everything else that comes afterwards is just, it's added value. That's what it is. I don't know whether that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And one point you bring up, though, too, is just like to this idea about what do you put on the billboard, where you put your brand. This really strikes, I think, at the heart of, I think, what a lot of marketers are facing today, which is that your brand actually is one of the most important exercises in your company's life cycle. I think there was, for a while, this idea that if you build a really great product, everything else will get figured out. And I would argue now that like your brand actually is a part of your company's product in the same way like the people you hire are part of your product. It's just really hard to figure out because nothing that AI gives you is going to help you be original and figure out your brand. It has to come from the heart and soul of the people at the company, and usually like the founders or the executives, and whatever you start with can be iterated, but there's no silver bullet or playbook to follow to build a brand. It has to come from the heart, which I think makes it one of the most difficult and challenging parts of marketing. Look, I've spent like my entire career in technical marketing, and I most recently through building Clarify have developed such empathy for brand marketers because it's one of the hardest experiences out there. And it's hard also to work in a room full of technical operators when your mission is actually much more creative and lofty.
No, I 100% agree. I'm a big fan of brand marketing in general, exactly for this particular reason. It's also it's probably exactly in a time like this where it's easy to create things, right? Like also where you have to put trust. Imagine anything that has to deal with payment or like sensitive information and so forth. It doesn't matter how good your product is. It doesn't matter how good that your transaction fees are or not. Like the market needs to accept you and trust you as well. And this is also a brand, right? Like it's not just about, why is nobody replacing PayPal or like Stripe or this and that? Everybody tells me like this kind of stuff, right? About like, hey, you know how hard it is to kind of get trust from people, like institutions to invest money into you that you're going to be around? And this is like beyond the question of like whether you're scamming people and so forth. But I think fundamentally, so what is brand? Brand is a defensible moat. And thank the tech lords that a good product is still the safest way to actually build a good brand. Because if you do not have a good product, it's very hard to kind of build also like on subscriptions, which you can cancel relatively fast, a good brand. But if you have one, then you at least have a chance. Now, a good product alone is not good enough. Of course, we know this, right? Like go-to-market is also going to be extremely hard. But yeah, so like, let's go into this because I know you also wanted to talk about this and I have a lot of opinions on this as well. So I would love to hear your take. So you said that, or the most common advice to building a good product is know your customers, talk to your customers, eat, breathe, and swim with your customers, and everything is going to be okay. So you mentioned in this kind of regard as well, like this need for dog fooding. Can you maybe also elaborate like really quickly what you mean with dog fooding, like using your own product? Like what do you mean with this particular thing?
Yeah. So classical definition of dog fooding is like you're basically trying to use your own product, right? You're acting as if you're the customer and using your own product. And I think in a lot of cases in product, that is a great way to get the alpha or the beta out the door. But it's frowned upon as using it as a guiding principle for the voice of the customer, because ultimately, how could you ever be the customer? You're biased. You don't live and breathe what the customer is living and breathing. But my maybe contrarian advice is for a lot of products, actually, you are the best fucking customer for your product. because you are experiencing the pain and are much more willing to deal with the pain than a customer might be. So your ability to adopt and give feedback to your engineers is actually much higher, especially in the early days of a company's life cycle, compared to what you're going to find in the market. I'll give you one or two examples. When I worked at Branch, we were like a very heavy engineering team. We were building an attribution and deep linking technology. We had a set of SDKs. Those SDKs were deployed to a bunch of applications. Developers could pull on the SDK and use it to attribute, where different campaigns are coming from for app installs. Now, even though we didn't have an app, we didn't have an iOS and Android app, we were some of the heaviest dog fooders of our product because we used our web SDK and we would treat our customers' apps like our own. We would actually go in there and try to install the SDK and deal with the problems of it ourselves, right? We would go into our dashboard and we'd try to create social media links using our dashboard. And that was incredibly valuable feedback for building the product. So that was my first experience where I heard on the streets in product land, you're not your best customer, but I felt maybe as if actually we were a pretty good customer. But, fast forward maybe 5-6 years, same problem happened at Runway. We were using our own product. We were a small startup, team of less than 20, building a financial suite that allowed us to model and project a company's runway along with a variety of other cash models in a way that wasn't Excel. And guess what? We were a startup, which was our ICP. We had a couple $1 million, which was our ICP. We were a team of less than 20, which was our ICP. And so I'd argue actually we were incredibly good users of our tool. Now, the big challenge, though, I guess, is you can be a really good dog fooder of your product, but you may not be the ideal ICP for your product in the future. You may be the ideal ICP now, but if you're trying to build a product that moves up market towards the mid-market or enterprise, if you haven't made that transition yet, you actually aren't dealing with the problems from the customers that you want to have. And I would say the third example of this is certainly at Clarify, where now this idea has become very resilient and has kind of solidified in my mind, which is to say, when you're really early in a company's life cycle, you can be, especially for a B2B product, if you yourself are the ICP, you can be a great dog fooder of that product. Where things break down, and I think where a lot of classical wisdom around product is right, is when you start to make that transition up market, when you say to yourself, hey, actually, we no longer want our product just to be for startups. We want them to be for mid-market companies, for enterprise companies. Your advice and opinion is not going to match the advice and opinion of the people you're going after. And so that's where this classical wisdom starts to come in. And I think this idea, though, is hey, in the beginning, when you're first starting, you can be your own best customer and you can dog food and allow yourself to progress quickly is really valuable. And I think that piece of the product equation often gets left off. It's mostly just talked about as hey, dog food, but listen to your customers. But it's actually dog food and listen to your customers at the right moment in time and think carefully about when your advice and feedback is the most meaningful versus when the advice and feedback of your customers is most feasible. And, I suppose over time, as your company grows, that changes and waxes and wanes. For example, I would imagine that Salesforce as a CRM company is one of their own best dog fooders. They're one of their own best customers. Because who else in the world is as big and using Salesforce? If they can't solve their own problems and their own technology, how are they going to convince somebody like Chase to do it, right? Now, and I would argue, but they didn't get there immediately, right? They probably went through many cycles of being their own best customer for a while and not being their own best customer, becoming big enough in size and stage to listen to themselves again versus to listen to others. And I think that has been a very important guiding factor in how we cater to and build our own product internally.
So I think you said a lot of good things there. I'm going to disagree on some things. So I think actually dog fooding, I would have made even a stronger case for it than you actually did. So first of all, I 100% agree. There's also a room for dog fooding, even if you're not the perfect ICP. I'm going to get into this one in a second. So let's just take the most ideal scenario. So the way that you also described it. If you can use the tool for yourself, if you are a CRM company, then you should use it also for yourself in some kind of ways, also in a productive manner if you can. Mm-hmm. What this is it's not necessarily listening to your customers, but it's feeling like your customer. And that is a very important thing in the first place. So whenever you are using a product and you get this feeling of how the fuck is this in there? How can they not know that this is so bad, right? It occurs to me every day. So dog fooding is a really good point on this. I've been making a case for going down market with a PLG motion. So like when you're doing product-led growth, you're usually also touching on on a lower part of your market in some kind of way earlier. What does that mean? Usually when you have a freemium or you have a trial that you did not have before, you usually have 100-to-1 ratio of before. So meaning per one prospect that you have now 100 free users that are using your product in some kind of way. So this gets you more data and so forth. So we can use this data to actually, even though the people that do not buy from you are not your ICPs, you can still use this data to validate specific things. And these specific things are UX problems and very, very obvious flow problems that the free users and the down-market users are experiencing just as much as the enterprise users that you have in the up-market segment. Now, why is this relevant? Because the same thing happens with dogfooding. If you have a business like we do at Godphoto, which is a Shopify for photographers. Now, most of my team are not photographers. I cannot tell them to kind of like run an actual shoot, like we cannot dog food the product in that particular way. But I would argue that most companies, and I mean this, like I see this so few, do not know how to run a good dog fooding exercise inside the company on their own product when they cannot use it productively. And I want to give you really quickly an outline on how I actually do it, where I think this makes a lot of sense. So it's small PDF, document management platform, huge, really, really big. So what we used to do is we had a product that was called Edit PDF. And the point of Edit PDF was to be able to actually edit a PDF without having to convert it, change it, and then reconvert it, so huge kind of benefit. But the tool itself, it was awful because the technology is extremely complicated. You have to parse the entire thing, kind of convert it into a document without the user noticing it, and you have to convert it back. There's a lot of technology in there that is quite complex, still to this day. So a good dog fooding session is not like a UX test, right? It's not that you're going to play QA. It's not that you give a scenario of like, oh, now click on this button and then solve this particular thing. You need to start at Google, right? So like when you're in front of the PC, you're not in the product yet. This is another common mistake that they do is they start way too far in the product. And you say like, hey, here's a scenario that Austin gave me that I need to kind of do. And here's what you can use, right? So like this is small PDF and so forth, whatever. Like there are some kind of boundaries, of course, so you're not starting to test like the competitor stuff, but you have to start from the very, very beginning. And none of the tasks that you're giving can in any way refer to the stuff that you have on your platform, like naming specific features and so forth. And one of the scenarios that we had is like, hey, Austin, create a 7-page essay about your dog and why it is the most beautiful thing in the next dog show that is coming up in the UK. And you need to include also a picture of your wife, and you need to make a joke about it. That's it. Nobody does this in a UX test, right? And there's so much stuff coming out of this that is just absolutely mind-blowing for product managers, where you feel like you would not have surfaced this in a classical UX test, or like if you just talk to your customers, right? Because if you're talking to the customers, you understand their problems. But there's still this kind of space that dogfooding uncovers where it is about the problem of your product that you have neglected over time, right? Like it's just like some one thing that used to be really good is becoming with time really, really bad. And we just tend to not notice this anymore. So this is going to kind of like my own point where I'm feeling like the core product is never done. It never is, because whenever you add something else, it becomes a little bit worse. And then you need to repatch it up and so forth. So I don't know whether this is a good point, but I think you should do dogfooding in that sense always. There's in every product, in every sign-up flow, in everything, it's some kind of way. And it's different than QA or like UX testing.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I think a big learning I've had over the last, call it 12 to 24 months through Ramp and Clarify is just, discerning the role of yourself as a user versus those of your customers, and figuring out how and when to exert your own opinion about what is best for the product versus what your customers are telling you. To me, this represents like more of the art of product than the science, because, a lot of classical wisdom that says listen to your customers, and there's a process for that. You have calls, research interviews, you collect the feedback, you have Slack channels, you get the feedback, you prioritize against your product roadmap. There's a little bit of arbitrary or subjectiveness there, because ultimately, like, what's priority is determined by people who are setting strategy, but it's largely follows an objective system after that point. But then there's this other side of product, which is like, actually don't listen to what your customers are asking for or even like what you need. set the vision for your product based on where you think the market is going and what they will need, or what you think the future you can create for them. And in particular with products, this links back to our conversation before about competition. In highly competitive markets where there's lots of substitute products, again, I think fate and fortune favors people who are willing to take risks. And often that risk means, hey, let's not listen to our customers, or let's delay listening to our customers, or let's modify listening to our customers in pursuit of something that is dramatically different. And this is important, I think, especially with like AI experiences. How are you supposed to build a product that nobody has ever seen before if you're listening to your customers? They can only tell you what they're trying to do, but they can't tell you what to build. You have to figure out exactly how to solve their problems while uniquely building something new. So anyways, this is just, I think, a meta theme for, as competition has risen and increased locally, you have to look out on the horizon and think a little bit more differently, a little bit more, I think, originally and more authentically about what to build and how, both across marketing and product spheres.
Yeah, I think that's true. But also like this differentiation that you just made at the end is also correct in like, yeah, we should not listen to our customers' suggestions on the solutions. But I still think that if you understand their pain, because that's ultimately also what you're trying to sell your solution on afterwards, I think that's definitely worth listening to. So here's an interesting one on CRMs. I have to date a very big need for a CRM to manage all the stuff that I have. The closest that I have is right now Superhuman, which is just like an email plugin. And I make a lot of money, right? Like I'm a solopreneur. I make a lot of money. So like firmographics do not really work on myself. But I have not found a really good single user or almost single user, right? Like I also have an assistant and so forth, of course, but like I'm the main user. I have not found a really good small scale CRM that really ties in what I need, because I'm not just uniquely a sales pipeline. HubSpot is too complex for this. Like nothing seems to kind of work. And there's a lot of demand also in this where I'm wondering to myself as well, like, I think HubSpot in general is just better positioned than Salesforce because we see much more smaller companies coming up in the future. That is my bet on like where the market is going. And that we have less of the huge players in the CRM market that are just going to feed off of everything. But we will see what happens. You know, like in the next 4 to 5 years, I think that currently the ratio between Salesforce and HubSpot is like 10-1 in terms of market capitalization, I think, if I have it correct. I think it's going to change. And I think there's much more like smaller companies and, you know, people like me that are also willing to spend money on stuff like this, but they need to be organized. And I think there's more software coming to really capitalize on this particular market because we're willing to pay if there is a good solution for it.
Have you used Salesforce and HubSpot professionally, like as an operator? Like you've been in the tool, you've used them, you've had to like look up deals and enter data?
Yeah. So Salesforce last time, really honestly, about 10 years and only on an integration that has already been set up. So I do not know how good it is out of the box. Let's say that. And it was horrible. HubSpot, I was the one that actually brought it into a small PDF. And then we had about 3 to 4 people working on it, you know, like with time as well. And I think that was the most involved that I've ever been. And that was like 4 to 5 years ago. So I also know how to integrate. I would like get started with it and so forth. Also, one of the reasons why I bought HubSpot stock immediately when I when I decided to buy them as well, you know, the tool. Yeah. I had a really good experience.
I asked the question because, you know, look, my co-founders and I, we've done close to 100, 200 interviews of operators of Salesforce and HubSpot. And one of the most classic lines I hear is like, you know, XYZ sucks. And I ask like, well, why does it suck? And they summarize it by saying it's just painful to use. It's hard to use. I think when you deconstruct that from a product perspective, there's a couple things going on. One is that these tools are just slow. They like literally are slow. It's just like it's 3 seconds to load a page. It's a second and a half to load a page. It's, you know, it physically is hard to move through. And I think that consumers now demand fast applications. I mean, the internet is fast and applications are fast and people don't like wasting time waiting for Windows to load. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think we're moving towards a world where manual data entry is like a thing of the past, and anything requiring you to enter data manually when there's a system or store of that data that already exists is a really high ask, especially since like you can parse, deconstruct, reformat, and play with data in ChatGPT all day long. I can give ChatGPT a giant block of data and say, structure this in a certain way. Here's an example, and it will work through that pretty quickly compared to what it would take for me to have to restructure that data. And so the second piece is like, I think people demand tools that take as much or nearly all of the burden of ownership and data entry as possible. And they kind of remove that from the user. And fundamentally, there are two problems with HubSpot and Salesforce. One is that a lot of their automations or integrations or enrichments have been built over the last 10 years. And simply like there's better technology now. There's like faster, better ways to move data into tools. And so like keeping up to date is hard. The second thing is that even if you're really, really smart today about collecting field data and entering it, there's always some, like the whole premise of a CRM over the last 20 years has been built on the idea that like the user will give you some input. It was a model built on the idea that like, hey, we are a pull-based system. We will pull or extract data from you. We'll say, Leia, like, who is this person? What is the deal?
Fill out the 40 fields about Austin.
Yeah, but it was based on a world of structured data where they said, look, we need some input from the user to make sense of all this. But if we can make sense of all of it, the solution is really powerful. You know, like we can give you incredible analytics. We can tell you what your pipeline is. We can help you forecast. You can do all these really powerful things based on the assumption that you have structured data that people are entering. That's why like the drumbeat of, hey, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. It's like a very common sales moniker. And that exists literally because RevOps professionals, RevOps leaders cannot forecast pipeline if their people are not entering data properly. And like that to me represents a fundamental assumption that's going to be challenged in the next 10 years. Because like, look, you know, you as a great example, you're a solo entrepreneur. You have all your stuff inside of an inbox. You do all of your work on LinkedIn and probably Google Workspace. Why is there not a tool or solution that can extract from you what the next steps are with your podcastees, a follow-up email to thank people, trigger the email afterwards to tell your podcast reviewer that the Riverside FM video is done and they should go check it out. Like there are all these small steps that take up hours every day that could be automated if there was a solution that was listening and just providing either guidance or recommendation for the next step, or maybe even taking that action themselves. And where we are with AI is like we've solved the problem of building discrete LLM models for very bespoke purposes. So like you can say, hey, I want you to filter this list. I want you to draft an email based on a bunch of other emails. I want you to listen to this recording and provide a summary of notes. Lots of solutions that are doing that right now. I think the next phase is saying, okay, like now that we have some output or some series of outputs, now let's design different models to actually take action. When you get this input, when you get a transcript recording, do this. When you get a note summarization, when a calendar expires and you see that event come in, launch an email, draft an email. And what happens is over time, if you build enough of these models and you daisy chain them together, now you can get really complex actions that actually work together. You can take something like a summarization or a podcast, and you can trigger that as an event, and you can say, great, these are the actions that I want to take. And each of these models is working somewhat independently, but together they create a human-like experience. And to be clear, I think like this is frankly very hard for something like Salesforce or HubSpot to do. That's the reason why I think there's a lot of investment and interest in the CRM and general go-to-market space, is because they haven't really been set up to handle what I would call unstructured data. And, as a great example, Salesforce had their big announcement of Einstein SDR. And what is Einstein SDR? It's basically a fucking email bot. It literally sends emails for you, and it tells the user that it's an email bot, which we just talked about earlier. But like if you see an email from Salesforce, a Salesforce URL that says I'm an email bot, and it was an auto-generated email telling you about my business proposal, like that shit is going straight in the trash. Like that's just, I'm not even going to take it seriously. And the point is like, how much can large CRMs innovate at this point? I'm not convinced that they're able to. And so then the strategy becomes acquisition.
So I agree. So here's an interesting kind of perspective. Maybe it's an interesting. Let's see. You'll be the judge of that. So I think what we see right now is that we start to have models like product-led sales where we try to optimize our sales pipeline. So like what a salesperson is capable of doing with what the product is doing to make it more efficient, cost efficient, to go after contracts that are paying us less and less and less, which is normal in a commoditized market, right? Like companies pay less and less and less because there's more competition, blah, 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 blah. So in order to be more cost competitive, what you need to do is you need to use product usage data where you say like, hey, Austin has been using this particular product. He's exhibiting a specific behavior, and therefore now we should call him, like timing and so forth and some other things. But what it also does is we have some knowledge about you in the product, right? So like you've been doing specific things. So I don't know. I don't have a good example in terms of CRM. So let's say we know from internal data that you have been using a very specific part of the CRM very heavily. Now, usually when you're picking up the phone, whether it's customer success or whether it's sales or whatever, you're using the free part of the product. How long does it take for a salesperson or a customer success person to look at you on what you've been doing in the product, which is valuable information, right? Like, I'm very happy to share this with you because you're going to look into it anyways. And this is to your point of like speed, right? The reason why we're not doing this right now is because it costs too much money. It costs too much money for the company to do. It takes too long for you to wait, and it just doesn't pay. But if you would solve this, then it starts to pay. And this is to my point of like, you're starting to go a little bit down market where it is still valuable to have someone human in the chain. And this is where I think at the moment most AI solutions are right in the market. If you automate 80% of the old workflow with 10%, exactly as you said, recommendation, and I'm kind of signing off on like, hey, yeah, this is what I actually wanted and this is good, or I'm giving you some recommendation based on like these 4 different unstructured kind of data things that came together and they are actually actionable, then we have arrived at the point again. If the system is automated and it serves you better with a human or without a human than the old stuff, then you're going to accept it. I prefer dealing with my airline over the chatbot that has become really, really good in rebooking me over talking to Roger, who is just like serving me not really well all the time. I'm sorry, but this is just like what it is right now. I don't know.
Yeah. One thing you brought up that I think is important for folks who are from marketing and RevOps to consider is like, it's not just about how expensive is it to get these types of insights to your sellers and marketers. It's also how easy is it to get these insights to a wide variety of audiences internally, you call it your internal stakeholders, when these tools were never designed, set up, or configured to collect this type of data. Very specifically, Salesforce has no idea what an event object is. Like, they were not designed to collect analytics in the classical sense when you think of Mixpanel or Amplitude or CDPs like Segment. They don't collect users and events. They have people, they have companies, they have static state objects that shift and change with values, but you're not capturing what happens to those over time. Now, HubSpot came along and developed an email marketing tool that, I think allowed them to bridge that gap. Up until 6 or 8 months ago, but for example, you could send an event to HubSpot, but you couldn't supply it with any metadata. You could say it in a page event, but you couldn't specify the URL, the page type, the discovery location, or any metadata. And so what that meant is like, okay, you're functionally limited in what you can actually send to HubSpot. They allow you to send events so you can trigger email marketers, but they're not really thinking about event data as a way to help collate or synthesize or derive insights on the CRM layer of a user. And what I think the next generation of CRM really looks like, and sorry, there's like a fly coming around here. It's probably obsessed with CRM. The next generation of CRM is really is thinking about how do we combine these bespoke tools that were once very hard to integrate and make it easy and accessible for users across sales and marketing to access those insights. Yep. I mean, it's the same reason why intent data, for example, is finding its way into a lot of outbound marketing tools and a lot of inbound marketing tools, because it's easy to, and it makes sense to include it in the spot where you're actually qualifying people. But I would argue, if you're building a brand new product and you're going to the great extent of including all these new insights and enrichments, but you're still dependent on the API from Salesforce to actually manage that system and set of tools, you're really not innovating properly. You're really not able to push the ball forward, because you're going to eventually hit a wall, which is whatever CRM you're using, there are limits or constraints to that set of APIs and that developer experience that could determine what you can do. And that's one of the big reasons why I clarify, we're building a brand new CRM from the ground up, is because we're we don't want to build a product that's totally dependent on the SOAP API and, an Apex code. We basically want to build something that's built with modern coding languages. And this gets into a much broader topic, which is just the rise, I think, of technology-enabled go-to-market teams. I don't know if you want to go there or not.
We can totally go there. But I still think that the future play, I think, is still to have some kind of tool, especially if you're now coming into the new market. And CRM is one of the, I don't know whether it's still one of the most expensive keywords in the entire world. I don't remember actually. It used to be one of the most fought over keywords in terms of like dollar for click, I think, if I remember this right. But anyways, but I think the play is still the same. Any new player, and that also goes probably for you, needs to offer something that is easy to use for the smallest unit of a CRM user, which is usually a team, like a smaller team, and then scale with the customer. So what do we mean with this? What we mean is like, you cannot forego product-led growth anymore, in the sense of like, it needs to be easy to test. The core function of a CRM is something that should be testable free. And even if you solve a very complex use case afterwards, I don't know, like some warehouse integrations or like cost projections, whatever it is, the core function of a CRM is to manage customer relationships, right? And that can still be demonstrated to a great effect. So you need to have some access at the lower part of the market. I do think it is nowadays extremely hard to enter in the uppermost segment, build a good brand at the same time for new companies, because there is this avenue still open for like extremely strong brand building in public as well, right? Like this is also something, because Salesforce is not known for be like, oh yeah, like we care about you. Yeah, we care about your feedback. No, you don't. Just you care about the next integration that you have. Of course you don't care. But HubSpot did this really always in a good way, and they have also a very strong brand. So I think I'm agreeing with you. So like there's a lot of material there still in the market to be up for grabs. So there's a lot of land to be grabbed for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. You hit upon a point that I think is, is near and dear, is that, look, a CRM was always intended to be an extension of your brain. It was like, at first, it was a structured database where you take the information that's in your head and you put it into a system of records so you can reference it. Like, I mean, anybody who's worked in sales knows that the way you build a great pipeline and win deals is you are rigorous with organization. You have a deal, you list the next step. You check your follow-ups every day. It's just a process. I mean, some of the best sellers I've ever worked with are just ruthless at being an efficient operator. They work out of the CRM. Everything's entered in the CRM. They enter their next steps. They have their follow-up calls. And of course, they use automation and fancy tools, but a lot of it is organization. But again, like this key assumption is that in order to be really good at that stuff, you have to be spending the time and energy. And so there's this question of what happens if you can allow every decent seller to be hyper organized, because the inbox is listening to their brain and distilling information and then helping them just focus on deriving value for the customer in calls, which to your main point earlier is like salespeople, really good salespeople don't actually persuade. They are just there to help people go to the right solution if they're ready for it. And if not, move along to the next deal and opportunity. They call it consultative sales, for a reason. It's like you're there to basically be a consultant. You're not there to push shit that they don't need. You're there to listen and be helpful. And if the right, opportunity and set of circumstances aligns with what they're buying, then great, you close them as quickly as you can. If not, you find your way to the next deal or opportunity and you don't waste any time.
Yeah, this is so true. And I can make an actual example also from my own business. So by all standards, like if you look at my clients that I have, I'm an enterprise solo business, right? Like I'm so far in the up market. And it took me a quite long time. You think about last year or even before, even where I really, really started to understand what you just said means in terms of my own kind of acquisition. Like when I have a good client on the line, I have a quarterly call with them, and I'm not pushing for selling my stuff or anything. I just try to genuinely help them, because I know if they have a huge problem coming up and they're like, hey, can we not ask Leah whether she knows someone or like whether she can do it herself and so forth? You have to trust the process in some kind of way. And that's what it is. So on one hand, you're correct, like it is a process that needs to be automated, but you also need to be able to kind of just say like, hey, it's going to take 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 to 16 months in some kind of aspects. The only thing that you can optimize is the wait time on your side. Hey, Leah, do you have time to talk? And then you can decide, like, is it tomorrow or is it in 2 weeks? That stuff I can steer, but I cannot steer how long it takes for them to have a problem. I just want to position myself in the market by saying like, hey, Leah has been helping us in the last 2 years for no cost. Sometimes this conversation never comes up, and that's totally okay, but this is part of the calculation. So most of the stuff that I have been gaining as advising clients, which also have paid really top dollar money, like really enterprise clients, they have been in the works for a long time. And it's not like shady stuff. It's genuinely good conversations, and I don't track it too much. I'm never going to go to a client and say like, hey, Austin, we've been talking for 12 months. It's really time that you pay me for the advice that I'm always giving you. That's just not how it works in enterprise. It's just not how it works. And this is also not how you should do it. It should be okay to have a couple of the good ones, and they pay for the ones that never really pan out, because they are word of mouth as well. Like they're distributing your brand. They do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I spent 6-7 years as a marketing technology and growth consultant in between my time at mParticle and Runway. And that was largely my same experience, is that, you have a couple of great customers or clients that you work with who allow you to operate a lifestyle by paying you. And that helps subsidize the ability for you to help as many people as possible and effectively just drive a really good word of mouth coefficient,
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Austin, we've been going for over 1 hour. I'm really sorry, but I think we have to end the episode, and I think we have to schedule the next one, because I really, really love talking to you, and I mean this. Is there anything that you want the audience to know? Do you want people to get in contact with you? Like, who is your ICP? Maybe they're listening right now. Like, who should give Clarify a try? Who should contact you, and where should they do it?
There's a couple of things that I feel like we're working on that could interest people. The first is we're always looking to talk to revenue operators, MarTech operators, RevTech operators. If you have worked with tools like HubSpot and Salesforce and Segment and RudderStack, anything that crosses that gamut of MarTech and RevTech, would love to connect. We're building a course in RevTech. We've already built a course in MarTech that we published on Reforge. And I just love talking to people about this stuff. So if you're in that segment or persona, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can set up a time to talk. I think discreetly for Clarify, we are a little under 8 months into the journey, have a team of 13, building an incredible product, have around, a couple dozen pilot customers. And the key persona, the people that we're looking for right now, are folks who either are using a substitute that's easy to replace. So you're using Notion or Google Sheets or HubSpot or Salesforce, and you haven't really invested too heavily in that infrastructure where you're willing to perhaps try to change. And largely, I think that's characterized by folks who are less than 10 million ARR, team of 2 to 10 people, operating with a handful of people in the CRM, don't have a lot of complexity. And we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to bring you on board and give you the opportunity to explore the CRM and what we're building. And if not, we'd still love to get your feedback for the future, because like we talked about today, I think the CRM is most viable to be disrupted in the enterprise space. And so if you represent one of those enterprise people, you're not a good fit now, but you want to shape the future of CRM, you should talk to us.
That sounds really good. And yeah, after this episode, I'm pretty sure that you're going to get some feedback. So I will be following you, and we're going to maybe talk about your CRM in a year or two again. By then, you should be already at the $1 billion evaluation. But I also learned right now that I'm part of your ICP because I'm not yet at over 10 million in ARR. So that much
I know, not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. I'm working on it, but it's still going to take a couple of years maybe. So yeah.
Go. We can get you on the platform if you want. It's no problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we should. Yeah, let's talk about this. Thank you so much, Austin. This was a great episode. And thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Leah. Bye.
Boom. We're done. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.